Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. This is How to Integrate SaaS in 3 Easy Steps, a joint webinar produced by Layer 7 Technologies and Forrester Research. I'm Scott Morrison, the CTO of Layer 7 and the Chief Architect. And I'm really pleased to have with me actually today Randy Hefner, who's the Principal Analyst with Forrester Research, covering actually a pretty wide portfolio. And among other things, application architecture, SOA architecture, strategies for building your enterprise, and application portfolios. So what we're going to do is begin with Randy talking about some of the issues in cloud computing and SaaS, and then I'll pick it up probably in about 15 or 20 minutes and talk about some real solutions for getting out there in SaaS quickly, safely, and securely. So without any more ado, I'd like to turn it over to my good friend Randy Hefner. Take it away, Randy.
Thanks, Scott. So there's a lot of talk about cloud these days, and the funny thing about it is that it's an odd mix of old and new stuff. So you get software as a service, and that's what we're going to focus on that today. And it's a new form of an old thing being applications, the application software that runs your business, and getting that where somebody else wrote the software. But then it's also a new form of the older application service provider model or outsourcing models of various kinds, where now you can get that software in a much more flexible environment, typically with much more flexible pricing terms, and that's why folks are interested in it. But we also want to spend some time talking about security, which is an old requirement now placed in this new context of software as a service and the broader world of cloud offerings. So we want to put those things together. So let's dive in first by just looking at where are we in the industry now with the adoption of software as a service. And we'll like all different types of cloud, whether it's software as a service or platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. Those are the three major categories, and then there's a number of minor categories. But like all cloud, there's lots of interest in software as a service, and some are actually getting started with it. So, out of this chart, the ones that aren't interested or don't know, there's 14% here, 8% up there, but the vast majority are at least interested, even if they have no plans. But we've got a leading group that's either implemented and they're holding where they are, or they're expanding and upgrading their current implementation, and some that'll be moving towards SaaS in the next year. So the bottom line here is that nearly half of the folks in Forrester survey say that they are using SaaS now, or they are to that point where they know they will be using SaaS in the future. So great, lots of activity on SaaS, even though we're just beginning in the adoption phase, and a whole lot more interest to come as people look at it. Well, when they look at SaaS out there now, what will they find? Well, they'll find a market that is moving very quickly and growing very broadly. And that this chart is a Forrester Tech Radar. It tells you all sorts of things, and I don't have time to go into all of it, but let me point out some things in particular. If you look along this top line and see some of the leading forms of SaaS, you see that there are these forms of SaaS that are providing very high value to organizations. And then you see a lump of different types of SaaS offerings down at the beginning of the curve. And what this tells us is that there are many broadly applicable forms of software as a service that are moving very rapidly in their adoption. That's what this double arrow fast forward symbol means. They're moving quickly in their adoption and in their maturity in the marketplace. And then there are a number of smaller, vertical, consumer-oriented, and other SaaS categories that there's so many we just can't do a Tech Radar on all of them. But so this Tech Radar is focusing on the most broadly applicable forms of software as a service, and there will be and many others that you'll find when you move into the market. And so what does all this mean to you? Well, you get nearly half the folks already interested, or already making plans for SaaS, with the vast majority interested. see these different kinds moving quickly and maturing in the market. What that means is very likely software as a service is in your future. And so you need to be putting some thought into, well, what are we going to do about this? Well, for those that are not yet making plans for adopting SaaS, then well, why not? Well, the top two concerns are security and integration. Security and well, I don't know if my data's out at this provider, somewhere out on the internet, then am I comfortable with that? Am I comfortable moving data back and forth? And then if I have this separate application that I'm getting from some SaaS provider, well, how's that going to fit with all my other applications? Well, for many SaaS providers, especially the big ones, and the one that most folks recognize by name is Salesforce.com. For most of them, like Salesforce, SOA is a big part of the answer to the integration challenges. So let's have the application run out there in the cloud, but let's find the right ways and right times to exchange data and transactions with other applications back home via SOA interfaces that may be SOA interfaces where our on-premise applications call into the cloud, or even where the cloud calls back into our enterprise applications. So SOA is a big part of that answer, but what about security? Well, so let's dive into SOA, security. How do you think about that? How do you think about that, particularly in a SaaS environment? So let's start with a bit of foundational thought here and say that simple SOA security is simple. So we've got a nice little easy scenario here where we've got services or clients, consumers of a service on either side that might be calling, making request response back and forth to each other. And we're going to put one of them in our on-premise platform, one of them on the SaaS platform. Well, the simple answer for security is to put a two-way SSL connection between the two. A certificate on both sides, both sides authenticate the other. Makes it very difficult for hackers to try to get into and do anything with your services and mess with them because they can't even make a connection to start trying to play around with it unless they can steal a certificate and a private key. Not an insurmountable barrier, but a very, very difficult one if you're careful at all with your certificates. So, great. Just wonderful if your world is simple. But lots of things are out there to make your world not so simple. Let's start with the view of the environment of an extended enterprise. Well, so we've got our corporate security environment for our on-premise applications. But now we're saying we're going to have a cloud SaaS provider environment. Well, they have their own security environment there as well that has its characteristics. But we're not done yet. Within an extended enterprise, we may have business units, subsidiaries, lines of business, divisions that have their own security environments that are separate from the corporate security environment, or they have their own data centers or other ways of making the environment more complex. But we're not only just interested in this SaaS provider and our business units, we're interested in business partners as well, whether they are business partners, customers, suppliers, government entities that we integrate with, or potentially other cloud and SaaS environments. We're plural on all of these, really, except our core security environment. So our environment is complex. But not only our environment, the business requirements. As we see regulatory concerns, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA in the healthcare industry, and plenty of others, and regulations that vary by geographic area. This drives a deeper need for accountability in our solutions, and those regulations don't care if your application is SaaS or on-premise or anything else. You still have to meet privacy regulations that drive needs for deeper accountability that drive us to want to often know the individual user, not just the calling application or the name of the business partner. Or we had need for richer entitlements, deeper and more nuanced restrictions on who can see what. I was talking to an investment banking firm, and their scenario was that a trader could only see the various reports from the research desk if those reports were applicable to the industry and the region in which that trader worked. And so they had to have a scheme of marking each report with the right metadata to identify where it was from. And they had to build more into their security environment, more rules for how to make the mapping of who's entitled to see what. If you have many business partners, then this two-way SSL scheme managing certificates for each different partner can become quite a management burden. So that makes that more complex. And we need much greater flexibility, to be able to have different policies for security with different partners and different kinds of partners and customers, and to the degree that we are continually enhancing our security and enhancing our environment, frequent policy maintenance increases the risk of error in maintaining these policies. And we mentioned regulations, and regulations are often sort of the very the feared and very critical requirements, but these business requirements of our applications and solutions or internal corporate security mandates are often the stronger drivers for needing deeper SOA security. So what do you do? Well, what I want to set up for you is the breadth of concerns that you have to think about when you're designing your security solution for SOA. If you're going to do a comprehensive SOA security approach versus just simple SOA security. In designing your solution, you don't necessarily have to design a particular part of the solution for each one of the requirements that I will go through, but you need to consider them and understand how they impact your environment and your situations, and you may need to design something for each one of them. So we'll start with the problem of identity and the fact that, number one, we just have to understand who is the identity. And, are we concerned about identifying the individual user or just a business partner? And identity might be maintained in multiple locations or maybe one location. So as you look at identity and you think, well, is it the application, the business partner, the individual user who is actually being authenticated and actually being granted access? And if it's an application, what is that application allowed to do on a user's behalf?